Hi, I'm Susan Groth. I am a grad student at Morningside College, and I'm also an agriculture science teacher at ESAC in a small school in Northwest Iowa. I did my study on the effects of student stress levels by having dogs in the high school classroom. My major problem statement is teenagers, especially our high school students, are all going through so many different stresses. They just have lots of changes going on in their lives, their home lives could be crazy. They're dealing with all their after school activities, classes, all sorts of things. And all of these different stressors can lead to further issues, whether it could be teenage pregnancy, dropout, the list kind of goes on there, but these stresses can lead to larger problems. Another major issue too is if we think of our high school students, where are they spending most of their time at? And that's going to be in school. They're at school all day, and so it's likely that some of their stressors are coming from school. My whole purpose with this is I wanted to make my classroom kind of a safe zone for students. I've seen students firsthand stressed out, and it just totally makes them shut down. They are not engaged in the classroom, and it really affects their classroom performance. And so I want to be able to find a way to assist in decreasing those stress levels in order for them to be more successful in my class. Some past research that has been done has really been looking at children with social disorders, especially with anxiety and talking with other people, socializing. A few specific programs that have happened is one with elementary students in an after-school reading program. Before they're really apprehensive to reading, they weren't excited about doing it. They didn't feel very confident in reading, and they brought in dogs and actually had these students read to these dogs, and they ended up having an increased motivation. They were more interested in it. They were actually turning into better readers by having these dogs around them to listen to them while they read. There's also been countless studies of therapy dogs being used. Therapy dogs especially deal very well with anxiety. If people have any mental health issues, people can use a trained therapy dog to help them through those, to help calm them, kind of a soothing effect with them. There's also been some research done even on physical studies that can help with dogs, whether it could be with stress, because if you think of stress as it can be related to blood pressure, and there's even been some cases with people on medication like for joint pain, and having a dog present was able to help with that as well. I was really focusing on a constructivism learning theory, This has really been done by PJ and Vygotsky, and it really promotes socializing and real life skills and problem solving. So really how this study affects that is if they're stressed out, that's going to affect their social skills. They have to be able to obtain those life skills of problem solving through those stresses and being able to socialize with others. So I'm going to be connecting that with how having a dog there, it's going to help relax the students. They're going to have more of a common ground, having that dog in common, and that's going to encourage them to socialize more, which would relate to that life skill they'd be obtaining. The whole purpose of this study is to determine the effects a dog can have on students' stress levels, particularly in the classroom. The tool that I'm using is a Shih Tzu that was owned by the researcher, Shih Tzu mixed dog, and then we just have a measurement device, which was a paper survey that the students completed. Our hypothesis is that having a dog in the classroom is going to decrease the amount of stress levels for the high school students. And then looking at the variables, we have our independent variable, which is the dog that's going to be in the classroom, and then the dependent variable being the student stress levels, and looking at how they change by having the dog there in the classroom. Some methods is this was done with my 14 freshman intro to agriculture students, and this is an elective class. So it's not a requirement by any means. I had 10 girls and 4 boys. I didn't have any students on IEPs or 504s, but there is kind of a variety of socioeconomic statuses in my classroom. The only materials I needed was a stress survey that they took on paper, and the stress survey, which I'll be showing in a minute, utilized a Likert scale. And so students had to rate kind of their opinion or stress level based on the question. And then the Shih Tzu mixed dog that was brought into the classroom as well. Here is the copy of the survey. It included 14 questions. This is just the front side. But as you can see, this is exactly what they got. And they have just give them a question of, in the last month, how often have you dealt successfully with day-to-day problems and annoyances? Then the students would answer anywhere from very often to never. When I pass these out to students, I just assign them a number that they use each time. And so to have kind of some privacy there with them, so they did not have to put their names on them. Some chose to put their name on theirs, but I just utilize the same number for everyone for each survey. Over here is explaining how the survey was scored. And so the questions 4, 5, 6, 7, 9, 10, and 13 were the only ones that were actually factored in to measuring the stress level. So for example, the question that I read earlier, number 4, if they would have said very often for that, they wouldn't be getting any points contributing. So the higher the points would indicate the higher amount of stress that they had. My procedure lasted for 10 weeks. They took that survey I just showed 4 times. So the first time they took it was mainly to collect just some baseline data to start with. And then the second survey, we just went about class as we normally did, and then we took the survey again. After the second survey, the dog was incorporated into the classroom. We kind of went about class as normal, but the dogs was there every day for 4 weeks. And then after that, they completed the survey for a third time. After the survey was completed, then the dog was removed from the classroom. And then 2 weeks later, they took the survey once more to see how data would have changed by having the dog not in the classroom anymore. When data was analyzed, we used a pair sample t-test to be able to determine the difference in stress levels in between each survey. So my results, as you can see, I look at the averages here, and so from kind of that first round of baseline data, there was an increase in stress levels. So there was no change here, it was just kind of getting my initial data. In between survey 2 and 3 is where the dog was in the classroom. So as you can see, my stress levels or average stress levels for my students did in fact decrease by having a dog in the classroom. And then our last surveys between survey 3 and 4, that's comparing the data after the dog had been in the classroom and then after the dog was removed from the classroom. And as you can see, the average stress levels did increase for students. Here's also just kind of showing a visual, especially between those last 2 surveys. This is showing that my hypothesis is supported. The student stress levels did decrease by having the dog in the classroom. To connect this to some past research, the stress levels, there's been tons of studies showing those, how they can be lowered by having dogs around them. My study was focusing specifically on a dog in the classroom and how that could lower them. And then also a lot of it was like student motivation, just seeing how if they have lower stress levels, just like some studies that have been done looking at lower the stress, especially from a pet there, how that's going to increase the motivation of the students. And then there's just many benefits of having a dog in the classroom that's going to be related, like we've said, to stress levels, but also improving their social skills, which was also kind of analyzed in this study to see how much students would be more apt to participate and kind of if they were more comfortable in the classroom. Some implications we had, so students, we were implying that they are going to participate just in class generally, but then also like interact with the dog as well. They aren't going to be like they were encouraged, but they weren't forced by any means to hang out with the dog or spend time with them or bond or anything. And then we have to imply that they were answering the stress survey questions truthfully. There's no way of knowing for sure, but that's the only way that we had to measure it. The teachers, their kind of very important role is to make sure the daily expectations are set. So like, yes, the dog is there, but class must go on as normal. It cannot be a distraction. They also should be kind of encouraging some interaction with the dog. Again, not to hinder away from normal class, but just so students kind of know it's okay to interact with him. But then at the same time, setting some boundaries for the students and the dog's safety. And then my implications for administrators would just be really to support the whole study, which they did. And they kind of help the teacher to be aware of students that maybe have some higher stress levels, possibly ones that maybe you kind of pay attention, maybe more to encourage interaction with the dog, but just ones that kind of need some extra help. There were some limitations with my study. The stress level assessment, it was definitely very controlled and it's been used many times, but it was very broad questioning. I think some students kind of like weren't really sure how to answer them. They were very, like I said, very broad. They were hard to kind of hone in on their current stress level. The duration of study was also meant to be 12 weeks because it's supposed to be 4 weeks time in between each survey. And we only had 10 weeks just the length of the class. And so time with anything was a problem in this study. The dog that was used was owned by the teacher and researcher. He was just an old, about a 10-year-old small dog, but he wasn't a trained therapy dog. Like I said, he was older, and so he wasn't always very motivated to interact with students, and so he kind of like kept to himself. And so that was kind of he could have interacted probably more with the students, so that was definitely a limitation. And the sample size, the whole class was looked at in this study. So each student was analyzed, comparing the stress data. I think some students, they're the same every time. They don't really deal with much stress, or at least they weren't acknowledging it. And so that kind of, I think, affected some of the data that we had. So my recommendations for those stress levels would be to have some alternative testing. I think an ideal setting would be to maybe measure heart rate when students come to class. They wouldn't necessarily know when the dog was going to be there. We'd get their initial heart rate to see if they are having stress, and then have the dog be around them for class, and then at the end of that class period measure their heart rate again to see if their stress level went down. If that was done, I would definitely not have the dog there every day. I maybe have the dog there like a couple times a week, have a consistent schedule set. But like I said, students probably wouldn't know ahead of time that the dog was going to be there. I think that would be a better situation for the dog and the students as well. Maybe give some better data of like kind of an immediate effect on stress levels. I would also kind of reconsider the dog that was used, possibly an actual trained therapy dog. There are some schools in our area that are getting new puppies, and they are training them in the schools, and then they will end up being therapy dogs in that school. So they're more used to the larger crowds, the noises and such, and I think that they would just be more interactive with the students, therefore possibly having more effect on their stress levels. And then I would also decrease the sample size rather than just focus on the whole class. I'd maybe do some background research and decide what students kind of qualify for the study to see maybe which ones have higher stress levels to begin with, possibly. Still collect that baseline data and everything, but really rather than look at every single student, start with a small group of students that you think need to be focused on. I think that would give a more accurate representation of how, if you have high stress to begin with, to see how the dog could actually affect them. And these are my references. Thank you.